"You can't sit here." She didn't even look up. Her white poodle sat sprawled across seat 2A, a rhinestone leash pooled beside it like a crown. "Bandit needs the space," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Try coach." He paused. Boarding pass in hand, seat 2A. Coastal Air. His name printed in bold, Marcus Odell. Grease still faint under one thumbnail from the morning shift. She didn't move the dog, didn't ask, didn't expect that a man in a faded work jacket belonged anywhere near first class. A flight attendant hovered near the curtain, unsure whether to intervene. Passengers in the first few rows glanced up from their phones, then quickly looked away, the way people do when they've decided this isn't their problem. Marcus looked at the dog, then at her, then briefly at the small brass plaque above the overhead bin, a detail no other passenger would think twice about. "I believe this is my seat," he said quietly, holding up the boarding pass so she could see the seat number printed clearly. She barely glanced at it. "He gets anxious around strangers," she said, stroking the dog's ear like that settled things. "You wouldn't want to upset him, would you?" A man in row 3 lowered his magazine slightly, watching. A woman across the aisle shifted in her seat, uncomfortable but silent. "Ma'am, the seat assignment does say—" "He's being difficult," Deborah cut in, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, tone practiced, almost bored. "Some people just don't understand how this works." Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He simply nodded once, slow and unbothered, the way a man does when he's already seen how this story ends. He turned and walked toward the galley, work jacket catching the cabin light, boarding pass still folded neatly in his hand. She watched him go, satisfied, already reaching for her phone to capture the dog winning its seat. She had no idea the man she'd just waved off like hired help wasn't a mechanic wandering into the wrong cabin. He owned the airline. "Tell us where you're watching from, because what happened next wasn't turbulence, it was justice, boarding right on time." Marcus had built Coastal Air from 2 used planes and a hangar loan 22 years ago. He still did his own oil checks some mornings, still climbed under a wing when the schedule allowed it. Habit, not necessity. Some habits remind a man where he came from. He'd learned young that some people only see the uniform, never the man wearing it. Even the one who signs their paycheck, even the one whose name is stamped on the tail of every plane in the fleet. He didn't head to the exit. He turned into the crew galley, nodding once to a startled attendant who clearly had no idea he was either. From an inside pocket, he pulled out a tablet, its case cracked at one corner, nothing like the sleek devices execs carried. This one wasn't company issue. He'd built it himself, wired straight into Coastal's live operations grid, the kind of access only one name on the org chart actually held. He tapped once. A single line lit the screen. Founder override. M. Odell. He didn't smile. He didn't linger on it either. He typed 4 words into a message bound to ground ops, reviewed them once, and hit send without ceremony. Behind him, past the curtain, Deborah was still filming her dog's surviving coach threats, laughing lightly for her followers, utterly unaware. She had no idea that single tap had just quietly reached into every terminal Coastal Air operated, and that the countdown on her morning was already begun. Back in her seat, Deborah was drafting a caption, thumb hovering over the keyboard like she was choosing the perfect finishing touch. "Some people just don't belong up here. #standards. She added a laughing emoji, then a paw print, then hit post. She didn't notice the gate screen behind her flicker once, then twice. Didn't notice the flight attendant near the cockpit door go still, reading something on her phone, color draining slightly from her face. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in Coastal's Ops Center, a supervisor named Denise Argrove stood up mid-sip of coffee, the cup left forgotten on her desk. Her screen read, "Flag 12 Mo, authorized, founder." "Full review," she said, already moving toward the terminal bank. "Now." A junior tech blinked, confused. Review of what exactly? "Of the crew that let this happen. Pull the manifest, pull the footage. I want it before this plane pushes back." She didn't know Marcus personally, not really, but everyone at Coastal knew the name stenciled on the wall of every hangar the airline operated, Odell. It wasn't a name people forgot. Back on the plane, passengers near row 2 had started quietly recording, phones angled just enough to catch the seat, the dog, the woman still glowing with her small victory.
One man leaned toward his neighbor, voice low. "Wait, isn't that the guy from the safety briefing video? The one who does the intro?" His neighbor squinted at the aisle, then back at her phone. "No way, that guy owns the plane." Deborah kept scrolling, refreshing her likes, utterly unaware that anything had shifted. Her dog stretched out further across the leather seat, comfortable, entitled, resting exactly where it had no business being. Somewhere behind the curtain, systems she couldn't see were already turning against her, quietly, methodically, one flagged review at a time. The man in row 3 posted his clip with a caption that took less than 10 seconds to write and less than an hour to change everything. "Woman's dog gets first-class seat. Mechanic gets told to leave. Turns out he owns the airline." 6 minutes, 40,000 views. 15 minutes, 310,000. 40 minutes, 2.3 million. Comments piled up faster than anyone could read them. She really argued with her boss's boss. Bandit better enjoy that seat. It's the last upgrade this airline's ever giving her. The way he just walked away, that's not defeat, that's patience. Local newsrooms picked it up within the hour. One anchor read the caption live on air, paused mid-sentence, then repeated it slower like she needed to make sure she'd said it right. Deborah, now identified online within minutes as Deborah Kessler, interior designer and mildly popular pet influencer, finally glanced at her phone mid-flight, expecting more likes on her earlier post. Instead, her feed had exploded into something else entirely. Her name, tagged, her face, screenshotted, and beneath it all, a single headline that made her stomach drop. Marcus O'Dell, founder and CEO, Coastal Air. Her thumb froze over the screen. She scrolled up once, then down again as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less true. The dog, still curled comfortably on seat 2A, had no idea it had just cost her a great deal more than legroom, and the flight wasn't nearly finished with her yet.
Coastal Air's headquarters lit up like a switchboard nobody had time to answer. By the time the plane taxied to the gate, legal, PR, and operations were already crammed into one glass-walled room, coffee going cold, nobody touching the pastries someone had ordered out of habit rather than appetite. "Get him on the phone," a VP said, pacing the length of the table. "He's not taking calls," Denise replied, not looking up from her tablet. "He's letting the review run its course." A junior exec, younger, newer, still learning how fast things could unravel, spoke up nervously. "We've had 4 gate delays already. The system's flagging every crew member who was on that flight, even the ones who did nothing wrong." "Maybe," Denise said evenly, "that's the point. Maybe doing nothing was the problem all along." Nobody argued with her. Nobody had an answer either. Outside the building, news tickers had already picked up the story, scrolling the same line over and over across 3 networks. Coastal Air founder denied owned first-class seat by passenger's dog. It read almost like a joke until you remembered it wasn't. One longtime insurance partner emailed within the hour, polite but pointed, asking about current crew training standards and whether Coastal had any documentation on prior incidents of this nature. Legal forwarded it without comment. Nobody wanted to answer first. A marketing director, visibly rattled, suggested a quick statement. Something simple. "We take this seriously. We're reviewing the situation." That's what everyone says. That's exactly why nobody believes it anymore. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in a quiet corner of the terminal, a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hand, watching the numbers climb on his tablet without a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. He wasn't angry. He'd stopped being angry about this kind of thing a long time ago. What he felt instead was quieter, steadier, confirmation of something he'd suspected for years but never had proof of until today. A gate agent walked past him twice without recognizing him, offering a polite, distracted smile both times. He didn't correct him. He didn't need to. Not yet. Back in the boardroom, someone finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. What does he want from us? Denise set her tablet down, meeting every eye in the room one at a time. "I don't think he wants anything from us specifically. I think he wants to know if we are capable of fixing what we should have fixed years ago, before it took a viral video to notice." No one answered that either.
By evening, an anonymous file landed in Coastal's ethics inbox, sitting quietly among a dozen routine reports until someone actually opened it. Subject line: "This wasn't the first time." Sender: Priya Nandan, 26, a gate agent who'd worked 3 years at minimum wage, memorizing flight codes and de-escalation scripts nobody upstairs ever bothered to read. She'd filed 4 complaints over those 3 years. All 4 had disappeared into the same silence. Attached to her email were 11 time-stamped reports, each one small on its own, damning together. A disabled veteran told to wait for the next flight, despite an assigned seat. A grandmother asked to prove her ticket twice in the same boarding line, patted down with her cane still in hand. A teenager traveling alone denied a window seat, reserved for someone else, though no one else ever arrived to claim it. Every single report carried the same internal note, copy-pasted so many times it had become policy in everything but name. Low priority, no action needed. Her statement, when it finally surfaced publicly, was short and unpolished, exactly the kind of plain language that cuts deeper than anything rehearsed. "I was told not to escalate. I was told it wasn't my job to fix people's attitudes. I'm done protecting a system that never protected the people flying on it." By morning, her name was everywhere, not Deborah's anymore. Hashtag Priya Spoke climbed past every other tag tied to the story, passing it entirely by midday. Reporters found her within hours, camped outside the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates. Asking questions she answered plainly, without performance, without tears manufactured for the camera. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been telling the truth for years and was mildly stunned anyone was finally listening. She had 600 job offers within 24 hours, from airlines, from advocacy groups, from a nonprofit that specialized in exactly the kind of oversight Coastal had ignored. She hadn't answered a single one yet. What she didn't know, what nobody outside a small circle knew yet, was that a personal note had already been quietly routed to Marcus's desk that morning, forwarded by Denise with a single line attached: "You need to see this one yourself." Marcus read all 11 reports twice before he said anything to anyone. Then he asked for exactly one thing: Priya's direct contact information and confirmation that none of her complaints had ever reached his office before today. The answer, when it came back, told him everything he needed to know about how far the silence had traveled and how long it had been allowed to. The Department of Transportation opened a formal inquiry within 48 hours, moving faster than anyone at Coastal expected. Marcus was asked to testify, briefly, before a small oversight panel convened specifically to review the incident and what it revealed about industry-wide practices. No notes, no entourage, just his old work jacket, still slightly stained at the cuff, the same one he'd worn that morning before any of this started. "Mr. Odell," the chair asked, folder open in front of her, "what standard should govern passenger treatment across your industry?" He didn't reach for a script. He tapped his tablet once. A single line appeared on the screen behind him, plain white text against a dark background. "A seat is a seat, not a judgment." That was all he said. He closed the tablet, folded his hands, and waited for the next question that never really came, because there wasn't much left to ask. By the next morning, it was the headline everywhere, repeated in outlets that rarely agreed on anything else. Editorials called it the shortest testimony that changed an industry, printed alongside photos of him in that same faded jacket, looking nothing like the man reporters had expected to find. Within weeks, regulators drafted new language requiring airlines to log and publicly report discriminatory seating complaints, no longer buried, no longer marked low priority. Industry insiders quietly began calling it the Odell Clause, a name Marcus never asked for and never once used himself.
Within days, 6 competing airlines requested voluntary third-party seating equity audits, none of them wanting to be caught flat-footed if regulators came knocking next. By the following week, that number had grown to 19, spanning regional carriers and a few international names nobody expected to move that fast. One airline, smaller and hungrier than most, published its equity score publicly for the first time, 58 out of 100. The internet, expecting to mock the number, praised the honesty instead. At least they're not hiding it. Transparency looks better than a perfect score nobody trusts. Insurance underwriters took notice quickly, folding equity scores into premium pricing models within the quarter, treating them the way they'd treat any other measurable risk factor. A terminal design firm proposed new seating layouts that didn't visually separate premium travelers from everyone else, arguing that dignity shouldn't be architecturally obvious only to some passengers and invisible to others. Flight crews across 3 airlines formed a joint training council focused entirely on passenger dignity, citing Priya's original report as the founding case study printed and passed around in binders during onboarding sessions that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. No press conference announced any of it. There was no ribbon-cutting moment, no single headline that captured the whole shift. It simply spread, the way weather systems move across a coastline. Quiet, steady, impossible to reverse once the pressure had already changed. Coastal Air, once a mid-size regional carrier known mostly for reliable regional routes and little else, was suddenly the name every competitor measured itself against in board meetings nobody outside the industry ever saw. Executives who'd never once mentioned Coastal now opened quarterly reviews by asking where their own equity scores stood in comparison. Marcus never gave another interview about it. He didn't need to. The numbers were doing exactly what he'd built them to do years before anyone thought to ask him a single question. Deborah Kessler's world didn't end in headlines. It ended in silence, which turned out to be far harder to live with. Her interior design clients quietly stopped calling, one by one, without ever citing a reason. A neighborhood social club paused her membership pending review, a phrase vague enough to mean anything and everything at once. Her dog account, once monetized with modest brand deals, lost its sponsors within a week, each one exiting with a polite, identical statement about brand alignment. She tried a public apology video, filmed in soft lighting, voice carefully measured. It didn't help. The comments underneath were calm, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. He didn't even raise his voice, and you still lost everything. This isn't cancellation, this is just consequence finally arriving on schedule. Weeks later, a short, handwritten note arrived at Coastal's headquarters, no return address, handwriting careful and slow, like it had been rewritten more than once. I didn't see you. I only saw the jacket. I'm sorry it took losing everything to understand that's the whole problem. Marcus read it once, alone, at his desk after hours. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. He folded it carefully and placed it inside an old crew logbook from Coastal's first year, tucked between pages listing maintenance checks he used to do himself. Not sentiment exactly, just a record of where things started and how far a single overlooked seat could travel.
Months later, a young man in a thrift store blazer boarded a Coastal flight, nervous, holding a folded acceptance letter to a trade school he'd applied to almost as an afterthought, never expecting to get in. The letter had come with a small footnote about funding from Coastal's new equity reinvestment program, seeded by the very fines and reforms that followed that one flight nobody had planned on becoming a turning point. He didn't know the man 3 rows back, quietly flying coach with no entourage, reading a paperback scene with a cracked spine, had built the fund himself, signed off on the first disbursement personally, insisted on reviewing every recipient's story before a single dollar moved. A flight attendant crouched beside the boy as the cabin settled, noticing the letter still clutched in his hands. "We upgraded your seat," she said gently. "First trip flying alone?" He nodded, stunned, glancing toward the front of the plane as though the seats up there belonged to a different category of person entirely. "Why me?" he asked, half expecting a catch. "Because dignity shouldn't be something you earn later. It should already be waiting for you when you show up." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded again, tighter this time, blinking hard. Marcus watched the exchange from a distance, said nothing, and looked back down at his coffee, the paperback forgotten, in his lap. No headlines followed him onto this flight, no cameras waited at the gate, just a boy with a letter and a seat that finally matched what he deserved, not what someone decided he could have. When the flight landed, Marcus let the boy exit first, watching him walk up the jet bridge with his letter still folded carefully in one hand, shoulders a little straighter than when he'd boarded. Nobody applauded, nobody needed to. That, Marcus thought, watching the boy disappear into the terminal crowd, was the only kind of proof that ever really mattered. A year later, Marcus stepped back from daily operations. No farewell tour, no retrospective interviews, no carefully staged photo for the annual report, just a short note to his board, 4 lines long, the kind of message that said everything by saying almost nothing. I built the runway. Someone else should fly it. I trust her more than I trusted myself at the start. His successor, Priya Nandan, once a gate agent with 4 ignored complaints sitting untouched in a system that never once flagged her name for anything but low priority, now Coastal's Chief Passenger Experience Officer, a title that hadn't existed a year earlier because the problem it addressed had never been taken seriously enough to name. Her first public statement was brief, delivered without notes, standing in the same terminal where she used to work gate check-in shifts before dawn. Every seat comes with dignity, not because someone's watching, not because a video went viral, because it's the baseline we should have started with. We're not finished yet. Reporters asked if she planned to keep Marcus involved in any capacity. She smiled, careful and brief. He'll be around. He always is, just not in the way people expect. Marcus watched the announcement from his kitchen table, coffee gone cold beside him, phone silent for once. He said nothing to anyone that day, just smiled once quietly and turned off the screen before the segment even finished, already certain the rest of it would go exactly how it needed to. Months after stepping down, Marcus flew Coastal again, economy, middle seat, jacket still faintly stained with grease, no different from any other passenger boarding that morning. The woman beside him offered him gum, made easy small talk, asked what he used to do for a living. I used to fix engines, he said, folding his jacket over his lap. She smiled, nodding like that settled something simple and honest about him. Sounds like good, honest work. He nodded back. It was, still is some mornings. No one recognized him. No headline followed him down the aisle. No one glanced twice at the seat number or the man sitting in it. The seat beside him was just a seat, exactly the way it always should have been, for him and for everyone else boarding that day. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere until one moment changed everything? Tell us where you're watching from and if a moment like that ever happened to you.